As Tina laid in bed, ready for the night shift, the alarms went off. As she peered out the window, she realized that every second counted. Not long ago, in Chile, the events described above took place. We learned about a life-altering occurrence from the individual who shared this with us. The story is heartbreaking because it could happen to anybody. In 1995, Tina was a senior in high school when everything happened. She was enamored with a boy, but tragically, she and her family had to go overseas in the midst of the school year. Only 2 months after their relationship ended, she had never envisioned herself in such a precarious position, and her fears about being pregnant were palpable. Her parents were extremely strict, and she was at a loss as to what to do. They would find out eventually, so there was no use in confessing the news or trying to hide it. Only to a trusted friend did Tina divulge, "Are you sure you're pregnant? I am uncertain. I feel terribly off, and I haven't even taken the test yet. I'll get you a pregnancy test." Her friend presented the test to her the following day. It wasn't a false alarm. Despite Tina's prayers, the outcome was favorable. She was unsure about her emotional state. Crying, she wandered the streets of Valdivia. "I must confront this," she said to herself as a newfound sense of strength coursed through her. "I'm about to become a mother." She went back to her house at last. In front of the television in the living room stood her mother. "I thought you were just getting home. Tell me where you've been. It's now 7 o'clock. You were supposed to be here by 2. With tears in her eyes, Tina announced, "Mom, I'm pregnant." As her mother approached Tina, a look of astonishment crossed her face, and then the door swung open. Her father was the one who burst into the room, asking to know everything. He questioned incredulously, "What's this about you expecting a child? Is this true?" Tina answered, "Dad, I never thought this would happen," recalling the rage in her parents' eyes that day. Her mom and father were enraged. They advised her that getting an abortion was the best course of action. "You're coming with me tomorrow. You've brought shame onto our family," her mother angrily remarked. Tina's mother woke her up early the following morning. They got on a bus in the pouring rain and freezing. "Mom, where are we going?" Fearful, Tina inquired. "Avoid making inquiries. You shouldn't be handling this at this age." Her mother shot back, "We're going to take care of it once and for all." "I'm afraid of you. I'm not interested in doing that. Come on, let's get home," Tina pleaded. "I promise I won't let this weigh on you." After traveling for 2 hours, they finally arrived in the small village of Los Lagos. "Mom, what are we doing here?" "Avoid asking," her mother said. "You're going to get through this." They went inside and were met by a man who looked like a doctor. On the wall, Tina saw diplomas attesting to his medical credentials. "Stop being scared," the doctor comforted her, saying, "I'm just going to examine you." He guided them to a compact workspace. He turned to face her mother before continuing, "You can move forward, but you should be aware that getting an abortion at this point is extremely risky. She's still a young girl," the physician advised. "She might become sterile and never be able to have children again if she has an abortion." The physician advised her to think about keeping the child and placing it for adoption. "We can't take the chance of someone finding out, doctor. Just get it done." Her mom urged. The doctor questioned, "Does she even want this?" Tina, under duress, just cast a downward glance. She was obviously under duress. "I refuse to carry out the operation. She is only a teenager, so perhaps that would change if she were older or had more kids. That is not something I want on my record. It is my suggestion that the infant be placed for adoption," the physician answered. When they got back home, Tina was still depressed by her parents' actions. Her parents set the conditions when they arrived. She would have the baby, but she would also have to put it up for adoption later. 8 months and 2 weeks elapsed in that period of time. While giving birth, Tina lay in the hospital. Thankfully, everything went smoothly. "The baby is gorgeous," the nurse exclaimed. Isaac wanted to see her son. She thought she saw him for a brief moment. Before long, her mother showed up, giving her a document to sign and giving up her child. "My mom came over with a piece of paper. I think I should sign it," she said. "I declined since I knew what it was. However, she threatened to keep me out of the house if I didn't do it," Tina recounted. "Don't worry, he'll be fine." Tina gave her reluctant signature on the document. With the exception of the mold that matched hers, she never saw her kid again. My mother handled all the paperwork to separate me from my own son, her own grandson, she said. A profound melancholy overcame her. Nothing she looked for led her to the location of his abduction. Her dad warned her that things will change going forward. If you repeat that error, we will not support your education and you will be forced to leave our family. You need to mature and begin anew. Rest certain, your son will do just fine. Keep going. Give thanks that you won't have to change diapers or give your life to a jerk. Thus, the years went by. Move on, Tina learned. She enrolled in university and graduated with honors. She was so successful that she was even awarded a scholarship to pursue a master's degree. She did, of course, occasionally consider her son. She wanted to know how he was doing, if he was close by or far away, and if he was sick. Fearing what may happen if she searched for him crossed her mind occasionally. She took a position in the capital's hospital after finishing her degree, got married, and had a daughter. In an effort to protect her spouse from hearing about her struggles, she kept her background a secret from him. Their family seemed to be very happy. Nevertheless, an unforeseen event transpired a number of years down the road. During her shift at the hospital, Tina showed up in the winter of 2019. A patient in critical condition arrived at the operation room around 2 in the morning, requiring emergency attention. According to the phone call, Tina observed paramedics transporting a wounded individual as she peered out the window. She had never before experienced such overwhelming terror. She found the young man needed immediate attention after racing to the scene of the accident. As Tina drew nearer, she could make out a mole that looked much like her own. Her father was brought to mind. The sense of connectedness remained with her despite the sense of hurry. The young man was able to survive the operation, but he was kept under close surveillance because of her expert performance. A mysterious pull kept Tina by his side for some time. She was curious enough to ask the young man for his name before she left to see another patient. He surprised her by sharing her last name. Tina dug further into the medical records and found out that he was an orphan who had been to the hospital previously. This young man could only be her son. The knowledge washed over her. I looked for any information regarding him on the internet. I was able to gain access to more information through my employment at a public hospital. It was obvious from his features, which resembled my father's, the mole on his skin, and his history at an orphanage that I was shaking. Without a doubt, he was my son. As if by some stroke of luck, he had appeared before me. I couldn't tell if I should laugh or cry because I was standing face to face with my son, and I would have never chosen for him to be in that hospital, in that state. However, I was hell-bent on making the most of whatever second chance life was offering me. For everything that I had done wrong, I would beg for forgiveness over and over again. I went back to visit him again as my shift was coming to a close, longing to be by his side. Tragically, a nurse came out of the intensive care unit where he was lying and broke the news. The patient didn't make it. I was astounded. Upon entering the room, I witnessed my son lying motionless, with co-workers encircling him and resuscitation equipment close by. Poor guy, he couldn't make it. A doctor told me when he walked up to me, coming from an orphanage, he had no family to grieve with. I clutched onto a table nearby as I swayed, nearly passed out. I sobbed uncontrollably after hearing those words and seeing him standing there, all by myself with my son. It was only after that I found that the other motorist had sped away after hitting him. He allegedly had been drinking to celebrate his college graduation and had failed to see the approaching vehicle. My concerns were further verified when I learned that my son had gone to the capital to pursue state-funded university education after becoming 18 years old and living in a dorm in the north. He was a decent young guy with a bright future ahead of him and good grades. Nevertheless, he passed very tragically at the age of 24. I haven't talked about my parents since that day, to be honest. I felt animosity towards them, even if they are quite elderly now. I find it difficult to see them again because I'm not sure if it's the appropriate thing to do. When I should have been there for him, they stole a piece of my life and crushed my hopes of being a mother. I was guilty. I ought to have been more resilient. How many times did he need me? Who knows? How many times did he cry and ask me why I had left him behind? Perhaps he would have been happier and this tragedy would not have happened if I hadn't placed him for adoption. Tina pondered whether he had made an effort to locate her. Given that they had the same last name and could easily be found, it's possible that he was aware of her. However, she had not extended her hand, and now there was no going back. To go back in time and tell him how much she loved him. There was no time machine. She had a daughter and a husband, but her life was broken and his had ended. She was overcome with guilt since nothing was the same as it had been. Tina's narrative ended there. But it could have gone in a different direction and had a different, possibly better, conclusion. Without a question, life can surprise us at the most unexpected times. Tina thought it was immoral for parents to punish their children for making mistakes, as many do these days. Because people are fallible and prone to blunders, punishment shouldn't be meted out for them. The first thing parents need to have done was provide assistance. Rather, they alienated themselves from their daughter and drove their grandson away. After watching the first story above, do you have any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comment section. Now, let's watch another similar story. This woman was widely believed to have abducted a small girl. When Melissa Gomez and James arrived in the little town of Saavedra years later, the horrifying reality became apparent. Their interracial relationship, James, a white guy, and Melissa, a woman of color, living in the city's most affluent and elite neighborhood, caught everyone off guard. Their social status and achievements were eclipsed by the color of their skin, and the townspeople looked down on them because of it. The pair felt the effects of this circumstance negatively. Her husband, James, was a successful entrepreneur who had worked very hard to become well-known and respected. Melissa, a scholarship recipient from an illustrious family, was a medical student at Chile's premier institution. Her parents were immigrants. In the years after meeting at university, they fell madly in love and worked together joyfully to develop a successful business. James became guarded whenever Melissa inquired about his background, which led Melissa to feel uneasy about her in-laws. Melissa became increasingly suspicious and intrigued by her husband's lack of candor, which eventually led to arguments. Explaining their troubled relationship was the only way he could appease her. Melissa, who had her doubts, decided to put them aside and concentrate on starting a life with James. Years went by, and the couple thought their lives were ideal, until they got some unexpected news. Tragically, James's parents passed away in a car crash not long ago, leaving their huge estate and considerable riches to their only son. Melissa was shocked and devastated to hear the news because she had never met her in-laws. However, James hesitated to talk to his wife about his feelings of silent sadness over his parents' deaths. Melissa did all she could to cheer up her husband, who she could see was in a lot of agony, but eventually she discovered him in their room, sobbing over old pictures of their youth. In an effort to assist James overcome his emotional struggles, Melissa had a conversation with him and proposed that they relocate to the ancestral home in their hometown. They made the decision to start over, sold their flat in the city, and set up a remote work arrangement for their company. A few days down the road, they made their home in the charming Chilean rural town of Saavedra, which was teeming with natural riches. Poverty, unemployment, and escalating crime rates were unfortunate realities of Saavedra during that time. Luckily, James's parents' estate was situated in the upper-class neighborhood, around by mansions and affluent families, where tranquility seemed to rule, seemingly sheltered from the hardships endured by the lower inhabitants. In the first few days after the move, everything appeared perfect. The couple was overjoyed, and James, after being away from his homeland for so long, started to grin again. But Melissa saw something unsettling. It seemed like she was the only person of color in the whole area. Melissa felt quite uncomfortable because all of her neighbors were white folks with racist views. Every time she stepped outside the house, she had to deal with hurtful remarks and contemptuous stares. Melissa was prepared to put up with everything in spite of this for her husband. The couple eventually adapted to their new life, but something was still lacking. They both had an overwhelming desire to have a child. They attempted spontaneous conception for a full year, but all of the pregnancy tests were negative. Melissa eventually made the decision to look into alternative choices, and James discovered a very well-recommended physician who treated artificial insemination online. After a long debate with James, Melissa finally consented to go through with the expensive insemination operation. Thankfully, everything went without a hitch, and Melissa became pregnant a few months after starting therapy. 3 months later, They discovered they were expecting a baby girl called Angelica, a child they thought would bring newfound happiness to their marriage. Their delight was quadrupled. Unfortunately, their joy did not last long. Melissa was alone at home opening mail one morning while James was away on a business trip when she noticed a strange letter. It was a letter written to James, signed by the physician who was supervising their artificial insemination procedure. Melissa opted to read the letter because she had a significant sense of anxiety about violating her husband's privacy. Even though she was reluctant to do so, her life will never be the same after what she learned. Greetings, Mr. James. I'm happy to let you know that the process of genetic selection and modification has worked as intended. In addition to having the physical characteristics you mentioned during our consultation, fair complexion, blue eyes, and straight blonde hair, the child will not inherit any genetic problems. This letter reminds you of our $30,000 monthly payment plan, along with additional compensation for risks and possible legal repercussions. It is important to note that eugenics is illegal in our nation. Melissa read something that astounded her. She came to the conclusion that her spouse and a dishonest physician had taken use of their desires in order to defraud her, feeling so angry and betrayed. She hurriedly collected her possessions and tossed them onto the street. Later, when James got home, he saw Melissa and a police officer standing outside, her possessions all over the place. James was handcuffed and brought to the police station to be questioned before he could respond. For his role in the unethical plot, he would eventually be sentenced to 14 months in prison and have to pay Melissa a sizable sum of money in reparation. The physician he had employed entered a guilty plea to charges of medical misconduct, barely escaping jail time but losing his worldwide medical license in the process. Detectives questioned James about his motivations for planning such a despicable conduct during the course of the inquiry. His late parents had disapproved of his relationship with Melissa because she was a woman of color, he said, so he wanted to respect them by doing this, to honor his parents' desires. James thought he could make sure their grandchild had white skin, blue eyes, and blonde hair. After hearing his story, the authorities decided James couldn't be a good parent and gave Melissa full custody. Angelica, Melissa's lovely baby girl, was born a few months later. Despite her mother's darker complexion, she looked just like her. A deeper and more unbreakable link developed between mother and daughter. After her ex-husband's trial, Melissa kept half of his belongings and lived with Angelica in their estate for a while. Neighbors' cruel and bigoted comments, however, disrupted their tranquil existence. Neighbors gossiped about Melissa and her kid, making derogatory remarks about Melissa and accusing her of child theft, among other things. Some even tried to call the police, but they were brushed off because of their bias and lack of knowledge. Melissa sold the house and returned to the capital city with tiny Angelica to start anew. The universality of a mother's love, as shown in this narrative, is a powerful reminder that God watches over his followers regardless of their race or color. After watching the stories above, do you have any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. If you enjoyed our video, please like, subscribe, and share our channel. That's all about today's stories. See you next time.